a type of factoring that's called the grouping method. Just to review, before we start the grouping method, we already learned how to factor using greatest common factor. The way greatest common factor works, if you look at a question such as this one right here, and you look at each individual term, and you try to find the biggest thing that can divide into each individual term. We break that down by numbers and by letters. So if you looked at this question, I would look at all the numbers first, and I would say, what's the biggest number that can divide into all those numbers? 6 is the biggest one. They're all divisible by 2. They're all divisible by 3. But they're all divisible by 6 as well. I've gone backwards 2 slides. I know you don't have this slide in your book. Right? We're reviewing. So you go back. Look at what you do. Yeah, there you go. There you go. So the biggest number that could go into all those is a 6. You then look at your letters, and you ask yourself, what's the letters that can go into all those things? In this case, there is no letter, right? Because there's no X in that last term. So the 6 would be your greatest common factor, and it goes on the outside of a set of brackets. On the inside of the set of brackets is what's left over when you divide each thing by 6. If you divide each thing by 6, you're left with 2x squared minus 3x plus 1. That was called your greatest common factor. We are going to use the greatest common factor to do the grouping method. Alright, so fast forward to where we actually are today. The grouping method. The grouping method is a way of factoring 4-term polynomials. The greatest common factor works for every question we do. Remember how I said it would always be the first step to a question. Now we're going to have specific cases. We're going to have 4-term polynomials today. We're going to have 3-term polynomials tomorrow. We're going to have 2-term polynomials by Thursday. And we're going to look at different types of factoring along the way. And for a 4-term polynomial, we use something called the grouping method. More review of greatest common factor before we get into the grouping method. So if you look at these 2 questions right here, our goal is going to be to try to remove a greatest common factor from those 2 equations. So if you look at the first equation, this is 1 term, and this is a 2nd term. See how they're multiplied? So it's kind of crazy looking. But that's how I would look at these. There's the red and then there's the green. These are your 2 terms. Is there something that they both have in common? Yeah, they both have an x plus 3 in common. So if something has something in common between terms, you can take that out of the 2 terms. So what we would be doing here is we would say that x plus 3 is the greatest common factor. So I'm going to take that out of the red term and take it out of the green term, and now it's out front as my greatest common factor. When I take out a greatest common factor, I write what's left over in the brackets. So if I looked at the red side and I took out an x plus 3, what would I be left with? Just a 2x. And if I look at the green side and I took out an x plus 3, what would I be left with? Just a minus 5. And you see how greatest common factors can work on a little bit bigger scale than what we're used to. Let's look at the second example. If you look at that thing, this has 2 terms in our word. Term 1 is x is in bracket 2x minus 1. Term 2 is the plus 7 and then 2x minus 1. Is there a greatest common factor between the red and the green? What's in both of them? There's a 2x minus 1 in both of them. See right here and right here. So we call that our GCF. If you were to take that 2x minus 1 out of both things, what would be left in the red? Just the x, right? The GCF is now gone. The x out front is still there. If we look at the green side, and I took out a 2x minus 1, what would be left? A plus 7. And it's a plus 7 because it's positive. Yeah.
You put greatest common factor in brackets now.
Good question. The reason I have to put it in brackets is because it's the whole thing I took out from both terms, which means I want to multiply the whole thing back in if I was to multiply them back together. If I didn't put brackets around this GCF, then I would be saying minus 1 times all that, and the 2x is separate. Okay, so if you saw a question like this, you don't need to write this down. So if I did something like this, that's saying only the minus 1 is times everything, and it's saying the 2x is separate. By putting brackets around it, now I'm saying it's this whole thing times this whole thing. Yeah.
That's not really related to this, but like if you have minus 5 on that question, like if you were to be doing something else, like solving it, wouldn't you change the negative to a positive? Like, is that like attached to the coefficient, so you don't change it?
Because it's attached to the coefficient is why we don't change it. Yeah.
So we don't change that?
No, this one would stay as minus 5, and this one is attached, so it stays as plus 7.
So only like outside brackets?
Yeah. Only if we were multiplying together we would change it. Yeah. It's a good question. All right. The reason we're doing something like this is these situations where you have these bracket GCFs, that's what grouping method is going to do. The grouping method is going to create these situations, and we need to know how to take a GCF out of it. Down here's instructions on how to do grouping method. I'm not going to go over them and read them, because reading them usually just confuses people, but it's a good reference point once you've done a few to look back if you were lost. If you're like, oh, I don't remember how to do this. So those are step-by-step instructions for reading purposes if you want. Instead, we're going to do a few examples. So, we have a question here. It says factor it. The first type of factoring I always try to do, no matter what, is take out a GCF. I can't take out a GCF. There's no number that goes in all of those, and there's no letter that goes in all of those. The second thing I do is I try to figure out how many terms there are. How many terms are in this question? 1, 2, 3, 4. There's technically 3 if you combine those. We're going to say there's 4 though. Okay? So if there's given you 4, just go with those 4. 4 terms means grouping method. So once I recognize that there's 4 terms, we know the next type of factoring we try is the grouping method. And here's how the grouping method works. You first make sure that you've written in descending order. So it's the highest exponent first, and then it works its way down into lower exponents, which it is. It's already set up for you that way. I believe that's what it says as your first step. Yep. The second step, in the question or the slide before, it says cut it in half. So this is what you do. You go to the second term, negative 4x, and right after that, you cut it in half. So in my page, I created a blue side and a red side.
So it's like the coefficient matter, because not like 4x, or 6x. So the exponent goes back.
That doesn't matter. So if it went plus 6x minus 4x, you'd be good. So see how I've cut this in half into the blue side and the red side. And I cut it right after the second term. So the plus is still with the 6. Alright, the reason I cut it in half is you've created 2 sides which you can take a GCF out of both sides. So now I look at my blue side and I ask myself, can I GCF the blue side? Can I GCF the blue side? Is there something that comes out of both things? An X. So there's X that comes out, and I would be left with X minus 4. If I look at the red side, is there a GCF that can come on the red side?
6 and 24.
6 and 24, there's got to be a number that can go into both those. So what number can go into both of them? Yeah, 6. In this case, I'm going to say it's a positive 6. And I'm going to definitely clarify that it's a positive. So plus 6, and I'd be left with X minus 4. So just to review, I cut it in half. The reason I cut it in half was because I could GCF each half separately. What this did for me was it created a situation I was just looking at before. Yeah,
If you get X minus 4 on the left, like you just like take minus 4X and then it's just like X.
I divided both by X in the GCF. So X squared divided by X would be X. And then negative 4X divided by X would be negative 4. Yeah, so I GCF'd out the X. Alright, by doing this cutting in half thing, I'm creating a situation where now I have a GCF in both terms. See how the blue side has an X minus 4 and the red side has an X minus 4. So that means I can GCF again. So I can GCF out those brackets. And if I was to take the X minus 4 away from the blue side, what would I be left with? Just X. And if I took the X minus 4 away from the red side, what would I be left with? Just plus. And what you've done is you've taken a 4-term polynomial and you have factored it into a multiplication question. You've unmultiplied something. Grouping method is usually a little weird off the start. Usually the first couple times we say it, it's like, ooh, but it gets better once you do it a few times. The nice part about it is it's very procedural usually. So practice kind of makes perfect with factoring. Any questions about the first one? I've tried my best to color code it so you can see where things are coming from. Alright, we'll do another one. So, we have a question. The first step to every factoring question is take out a GCF. I can't take a GCF out of all 4 things. Right? That's very clear. There's no letter in all 4 terms, and there's no number in all 4 terms that I can divide into all 4. The next step is to count how many terms you have. I have 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. 4 terms means I do grouping method. That might seem trivial right now to count the number of terms, but once we've learned all of our different factoring, it's going to be important that you know when to use which one. So 4 terms means grouping method. The first step to grouping method is cut the question in half. Right after the second term, you cut it. I color code mine so I have a red side and a blue side. The reason we cut it in half is that you're able to GCF each individual. So if I took a GCF out of the blue side, I could take an X squared out of both terms on the blue side. That would give me X squared outside, X minus 3 inside. On the red side, I can do a different GCF. I can GCF out a positive 5. Notice that I put plus 5, so I'm still separating the 2 sides somehow. So plus 5, that would leave me with X minus 3. So I cut my thing in half. I GCF the 2 halves separately. And now I should notice that if I look at my red side and I look at my blue side, there's something I can now GCF out of both sides. My x minus 3. I can GCF that out of both separate halves. That gives me an x minus 3 out front. The blue side, if I was to GCF out the x minus 3, I'm left with x squared. The red side, if I was to GCF out the x minus 3, I'm left with plus 5. And that would be my final answer. I factored this, that means I took a question and I unmultiplied it, right? I turned it into a multiplication question. Any questions? Alright, let's try a couple harder ones. So, I'm going to look at this question right here. It says factor the following. That's all it's going to say on a test too. It's just going to say factor. You need to know the first type of factor you always try is greatest common factor. You can't greatest common factor this thing. You then count the number of terms. There's 4 terms. 1, 2, 3, 4. That means you use grouping method. Grouping method says cut something in half. So I'm going to cut it in half right after the second term. That creates 2 sides for me. I do red and blue. The reason I cut it in half is I'm creating 2 situations where I can GCF. So I can take a GCF out of the blue side only. What can come out of just the blue side? X. So if x can come out of just the blue side, they move with x plus 4. If I look at the red side, it's not quite as obvious what can be GCF'd out. So if I were to look at that, there's no letter that can come out of both, and there's no number that can come out of both. But they do both share something. They both share the negative. So what I can GCF out when 2 things have negatives is I GCF out a negative 1. If I was to divide negative x by negative 1, I would be left with just a positive x. If I was to divide negative 4 by negative 1, it would change it to a positive 4. So sometimes you're not looking for necessarily a number that can go into it, but maybe a negative sign that could go into both things. If you do grouping method properly, you should always have something you can now GCF out of the entire question. It'll always be whatever's in brackets. So the x plus 4 should be in brackets for both terms, the blue side and the red side. In this case, it is. So that means I've done it properly. So I go x plus 4 out front. And then whatever's left from the blue side and whatever's left from the red side go in brackets. That is my final answer after I've factored it. Any questions? I'm about to get a little bit harder again. Alright. I got a question. I try to GCF it, I can't. I count the number of terms. There's 4. That means I use grouping method, which cuts things in half. So I go, I cut this in half. When I cut it in half, it's creating 2 sides that can both be GCF. On the left side, we have a y taken out of it. Gives me an x minus 5. The red side can have a 2 taken out of it. So I go plus 2, negative x plus 5. I'll let you speak in 1 second. Because I think you see where I want to go. I'm just going to let people write that out. So all I did was I followed my grouping method rules and I took out my GCFs. I'm putting plus 2 because I took out a positive 2 out of the red side. All right, Brody, go ahead. Yeah. So if you look right now in my brackets, they've always been the same in any other question. In this case, they're not the same. They're really close, but they're different. This one is x minus 5. This one's negative x plus 5. See how the signs are different? This one's a positive x, this one's a negative x. This one's a negative 5, this one's a positive 5. They're complete opposites of each other. So how do we change all the signs inside of a set of brackets? We change the number out front to be negative. So instead of factoring out a positive 2, I should have factored out a negative 2. And by making this a negative 2, it would change the inside to now be x minus 5. That changes the symbols. So you're going to have to use a little bit of mathematical intuition to know that I actually needed to factor a negative 2 instead of a positive 2, so that you actually get the right thing in the brackets. Anybody have any questions on that? Yeah, go ahead, Courtney. In the first time it was positive, because I only divided these by positive 2. So negative 2x divided by positive 2 was negative x. Pardon? I just didn't hear you. How did I get 2? I chose, because if we can't take a negative out of both, we usually go with positives. Okay, you remember on this question, see how they were both negatives? So I took out a negative. But if they're not both negatives, I typically would take out a positive number instead of a negative number. In this case, we actually would have been better off taking out a negative number, but we only figured that out once we looked at our brackets. So normally take out a positive, unless taking out a negative works better for you again. That means instead of positive 2, I would have the black numbers here. I'm going to change this to match up what I actually want now. So I should have taken out a negative 2. That gives me x minus 5. Now that we take out the proper number, I have the proper thing inside the brackets of both red side and the blue side. I can step out an x minus 5. If I take out an x minus 5, what am I left with on the blue side? Just a y. And the red side, I'm left with a negative 2. So that would be my answer after I completely factor it. All right. There's 2 questions here. Both are test-style questions, something that you would see on a test. I want you to try the first one on your own. Okay, so give it a shot. See if you can get the right answer. We'll go over it together after. Then you can try the second one on your own. And again, we'll go over it after. I'll give you a couple minutes to try the first one. Walk it through quickly. I see a lot of people stumped. You might just be stumped on what the question is asking you to do. So the question says, one factor of this is. If you wanted to figure out what one factor is, that means like one thing that you're multiplying together once you've unmultiplied a question. What do you think I'm going to have to do to this polynomial? I'm going to have to factor. Once I have factored it, I should have one of these things in a set of brackets. Okay? But you have to factor that to figure out the answer. So that's what this question's asking you. Factor this thing. When you're done factoring, one of these things, A, B, C, or D, will be in your answer somewhere. Okay, so now that you know the question's saying factor, see if you can factor that thing. Figure out which method you need to use, and try factoring it. I'll give you a couple more minutes, now that maybe you've got a hint on how to start. Cruising around the room. Looks like people have done a good job of the first step of grouping method. So you figured out that there's 4 terms. That means you have to do grouping method. I've seen a lot of people are cutting this thing in half and then cutting it in half properly. That's wonderful. The next thing is GCFing each half, which is throwing off people, right? Because it's a little bit more complex than what we've done so far. If you look at the blue side, and I'm asking you to take out a GCF, you're trying to find something that can divide into both terms in the blue side. You go numbers and then check your letters after. So is there a number that can divide into both the coefficients? There's not. Is there an x in both? So x would be part of the GCF. Is there a y in both? No, so you can't take out a y. Is there a z in both? So you can't take out a z. So your GCF is only x. And you're left with y minus 4z. So when I take an x away from the blue side, I'm left with a y from the first term and a negative 4z from the second term. That's what's left over when I take out the x. On the red side, it's a little bit harder to GCF the red side because there is a number that can go into both. What numbers can divide into 12 and 3? 3 can go into both. So in this case, I'm going to take out a negative 3 because I'm going to use intuition. Now normally I would do positive 3, right? Why would I want to do a negative 3 instead, Brody?
It's like the 4, which has negative, is a positive, divide by positive.
Bingo. When you look at the blue side, the order of the blue side was positive, then negative. So in the brackets was positive, then negative. If you look at the red side, the order is negative, then positive, which is going to kind of throw us off. So to change the order to become positive and then negative, to change the signs, we take out a negative 3 instead of a positive 3. And that'll fix the order for us. The next thing is I check my letters. Is there a T in both of these? Awesome. So it's going to be a negative 3T. Is there a Z in both of these? Nope. Is there a Y in both of these? No. So my greatest common factor is negative 3T. If I was to take out a negative 3T from both things on the red side, I'd be left with 4Z. Oh, jeez. I screwed these up. That's okay. Yeah, that's alright. We'll fix that. We take out a 4Z, and if I take out a 3T, what am I left with? A negative Y. We tried to use intuition, and then we intuitionally screwed ourselves up. So we have the right order. It goes positive, negative, and then positive, negative. That's good. Well, what's the problem with our brackets? And you see it, Hannah. What's the problem? Yeah, we still have the same problem as before. We're in a different order. Like we have y then minus 4z, but this one goes 4z and then minus y. So you should have learned a long, long time ago, the order in which you add and subtract things doesn't matter. So for instance, if I told you 2 plus 3, you would say it equals 5. If I told you 3 plus 2, the answer is still 5. Right? The order in which you add things doesn't matter. So when you look at this one's y and then minus 4z. I could reorder this one so that the z comes second. So it would become negative 3t. And I could just reorder this to be negative y plus 4z. So now the y's and the z's are at least in the right order. Yeah.
Wait, did you like switch some positives and negatives?
Yeah, so we're going to have to switch them again.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was gonna say,
We should have never switched them in the first place. Yeah, that's what screwed us up. So we switched it because we were trying to get the proper order, but then we didn't realize that our letters were wrong. See how I've reordered this? These are the same things. 4z minus y is the same thing as negative y plus 4z. That's the same thing, just a different order. Just like reordering a 2 and a 3. It's the same thing still. The blue side hasn't changed. Okay, what's the probability, Lord? You're right. What's the problem now? We have it in the right order, but now the issue is
Oh, the negatives are.
the negatives are in the wrong spot. So to fix the negatives, what do we do to the number in front? We changed its sign. So when we took out a negative 3t, we actually would have been fine taking out a positive 3t, and then it would change the symbols on the inside. So we tried to fix something, we made it worse. Now, I think the way most people would have done this question, okay, would have been like this. I'm going to do it a little quickly. I think most people would have taken out a positive 3t. Is that fair? Yeah? Okay. So if you took out a positive 3t, your question would have looked like this. You don't have to write this out, but if you already wrote out how to take out a positive 3t, I want to show you what your question would look like. If you were following what I did, then you don't need to write this out. Sorry, that's not what we put up. Correct? So if you took out, boys. What?
What would you do for changing the negative, or like changing the positive to negative, changing it back? Why didn't you just keep it?
That's what I'm going through right now, if you just kept it. Yeah, so the reason we changed it was because we were trying to skip a step and save ourselves problem, and we created another problem, because it wasn't the same order. So if you took out a positive 3t, this is what you should have ended up with in your work, which is what I think most people probably did. They probably didn't try to do the little trick early like we did. Me and Brody tried to do things too fast. Yeah, it happens. Yeah, so we tried our best. So most people probably got this. You should have recognized that these things were close, but they were in a different order. This one went y and then 4z. This one went 4z and then y. So all you had to do was reorder that and flip them around to be y minus 4z. All you do is reverse the order in which you've written them, and you would be fine. Okay? You would end up in the same situation either way. Just one of us did it much harder, that's me, and then some of you did it much easier, that's most of you. Either way, you get to the same spot. When you get to that spot, you should have had something in the brackets that was the same. That thing was y minus 4z, so that would come out. What you're left with would have been x plus 3t. So you factored that. This should have been your final answer. Now the question was one factor of. All right, this right here is one factor. This right here is another one factor. Those are two separate things. This is one factor, this is another one. They're saying one factor of this is, and you should be able to match one of your answers with one of yours. Brody.
Technically, if you're just like thought about it, and you did one side, and you saw the answer in the question, you just like kind of guess, right?
Yeah, like once you get to here, you could maybe see it. Yeah, and that's okay. The reason why they give you questions in this format, and they don't say factor this, is because factoring is unmultiplying, correct? So if they gave you the full factored thing for your options, you could just multiply them back together to figure out which one gives you the question. So you could get really good at multiplying and do the whole test, which wouldn't be very good testing, right? That's why they ask you for one factor only. So you actually have to factor it, and you actually have to figure out which one is here. Yeah, for sure. Which one is here? What's the right answer? C is here, y minus 4z. The other three are not in your answer. So when you see a question on a test that says one factor of, and it's going to happen so many times, you need to know that means factor it, and then check to see which ones of your brackets are there. All right. I want you to try this next question again on your own. I'll give you a couple minutes to think about it. This one? Yeah. So I'll give you a hint to start you off. The hint is that they've already done most of the grouping method for you. Okay? It's like they've already split it in half, and it's like they've already GCF the blue side and the red side. But your brackets aren't matching up. So you need to figure out how you can make those brackets match up to finish off your grouping method. Okay, so give it a shot. Just try it on your own. Don't need to ask any questions yet. We will go over it. But you need to be able to try these things and see if you can come up with any ideas on your own. Okay, the first step to doing this question. The first step to doing this question is that you notice in your brackets your order is off. This one goes X and then 2. This one goes 2 and then X. So you need to reorder one of them. I'm going to reorder the second one. So instead of writing it as 2 minus X, I'm going to rewrite the question as X, then X minus 2, and then plus Y, and then negative X plus 2. So the only thing I changed was the ordering inside the second pair of brackets. The reason I changed it was so that both sets of brackets went X and then number. X and then numbers. Right? The inside the brackets are now in the same order. All I did was rearrange the column, adding those things. What's the problem now? Yeah, go ahead, Kendra, yeah? They're in the wrong spot, right? This one has a negative with the 2. This one has the negative with the X. It's in the wrong spot. So if you want to change where the negative is, what do you have to do? You got to change the front number. So this is going to become a negative Y, and then a positive X, and then a negative 2. So you've reordered it, and then you've changed the symbols. Now you have X, X minus 2, negative Y, X minus 2.
On the test, was it like show your work? Aren't you have to like show you that? Just like,
You wouldn't be given that question as a written response question, so you'd be safe. Yeah. Written response questions, it'll be very clear what work you need to show. Now that I've done that, I have a grouping method problem I can actually do, right? I have an X minus 2 and an X minus 2, so that's going to be one thing. And then an X minus Y is going to be the other. That should be somewhere in here as an answer. It is in here as B. Now the odds of you actually getting a question like that are probably pretty low. Okay, that's a challenging question, but it's making you think critically about what you have. Right? And you need that ability to critically think about things. Any questions about grouping method? All right.